Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank UNITA and the University of Geneva for organising the event, and just also mention that I have had the very fortunate experience of visiting Tsinghua campus when I was at King's College London as Vice Principal. It's a very beautiful campus and a wonderful university, and I'm very impressed by being here today. What a stunning campus you have. I'm presuming this is one faculty of biotech, but I shall find out more at lunchtime. I'm going to address higher education's critical role in scaling two aspects of education for the SDGs: education about them and education to build skills and competencies to address the SDGs. But I'm also going to address, in the spirit of SDG 17 partnerships, the role of partnerships within and beyond the higher education sector. And I'd like to say the Geneva Tsinghua is a great example. And there are many partnerships signed with MOUs that don't go very far, but the commitment of seeing this large number of colleagues from Tsinghua here today demonstrates, I think, a partnership that is really working very well. I'd also just like to thank the colleague from the canton. What an inspiration. I mean, that's just such a fantastic way of getting school kids involved in the SDGs, and I'm hoping that's something that I can talk to you about scaling in the Commonwealth schools. I'm very privileged to be Secretary General of the Association of Commonwealth Universities. It's the world's oldest university network. It was founded in 1913, and we represent more than 500 universities across 53 Commonwealth countries. 2/3 of our membership are in low and middle income countries, and our members represent the diversity of the higher education sector. So they include public and private, old and young, research intensive and teaching focused. And our mission is higher education for a better world. And so just in brief, if I run out of time, because I think the time is squeezed today, these are the things that we believe about higher education and the SDGs. First of all, you can't achieve a single one of all 17 Sustainable Development Goals without somehow the contribution of universities to be part of those 17. But higher education was only included in the United Nations or in our world community's attempt to solve global challenges in 2015, when SDG 4 includes universities for the first time. Many organisations campaigned very hard for that, and that recognition is very, very important and central to the mission of the ACU. However, there is a huge amount to do, and we are nowhere near gross tertiary enrolment being more than 30% as a world average. So that is a huge challenge, where in some countries it's only 2%. I've just been in Pakistan where that is the case. And then I just finally want to pose a question which you might want to keep in your mind while I'm speaking. Recently, actually, in Doha, a colleague from Tsinghua was speaking and said, look, I am a high-performing scientist at this world-class university, and I'm very interested in a new project that rolls out agricultural reform in China, in poor villages. But I'm also going to have to do my high citation paper with my international collaborators. Now, the latter is the one that's going to give my career, is going to give me job security, frankly. And I don't think she was talking about Tsinghua. I think this is actually true for academic culture in every university, that academics are under enormous pressure in my university, King's College, to write papers, high-performing papers. And there is a tension between the actions required in applied research and sustainable development goals and the need to produce high-quality research. Of course, it isn't either-or, but it is, I would suggest, up to the institutions to create a more stable environment to honour both. And it is also up to us as institutions, I would say, to resist the pressure and pull of the rankings for the citation paper rather than the applied research. But it's a really interesting conundrum, and I think that one of the ways in which we're going to scale up universities' contribution to the SDGs is to address this tension. So, the Commonwealth itself is home to 2.4 billion people, roughly 1/3 of the global population, and over 60% of that population is under the age of 30. It involves both advanced economies and developing countries, and 31 of the 53 members are small states, many of which are island nations. With its enormous diversity and advantages of common language and structures, the Commonwealth therefore offers the potential to be a living laboratory for collaboration and progress towards the SDGs. And we are a living laboratory, and our connections with the International Association of Universities, with UNITAR, with others, is our also commitment to working in a global community to making change happen. So I'm going to bring some perspectives from across our wide membership. And I would say two things again, a tension between the SDGs undeniably providing a really inspiring framework for cooperation and action. But they are at a time when United Nations, multilateralism, international collaboration has never been under more attack. There was a training manual made in the 1980s for the US called VUCA, Volatile, Uncertain, Complex and Ambiguous Environments. That has never been more true than today. And so we also have to live within that tension that when we champion collective action to tackle global challenges, we're doing so in an environment that is actually antithetical in some ways to multilateralism. And I was reminded this morning as well that it's 100 years since the League of Nations was founded in 1919. And on the one hand, we never need that more than we do now, the United Nations, but the United Nations history has always been slightly not compromised, but the difficulty is of the countries that fund it sometimes weaken its political power. So they do provide a common framework to inspire and harness change. And I would also say that universities have always been involved in this. They have a core mission, on the one hand, to create globally minded citizens who are able to think critically, to be adaptable, to be flexible, particularly in this world where the Industrial Revolution, the fourth Industrial Revolution, is going to change the nature of work completely. And they are also committed, and always have been, to research, to finding solutions to global challenges. And you can't do that sort of research without, I would argue, international collaboration. We're witnessing an increased focus on the SDGs because it is a very powerful way to create, to ignite imagination in students, as well as faculty. And so they are driving conversations about sustainability in universities beyond a few academic disciplines and campus operations. And I think they're also helping that move towards interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity in universities, where often funding and other mechanisms makes it quite difficult to go beyond one discipline into another. So scaling higher education, providing education for the SDGs and leaving no one behind, we must first increase equitable access to quality education, including higher education. The ACU, the Association of Commonwealth Universities, has grants. We give grants and we prioritise the following issues: access, equity and access, including gender equity to universities, scaling up education through projects that we're involved in, which is about sharing content, creating blended approaches to learning, and research capacity building, recognising that research is a really, building up research cultures in developing contexts is a really important way of sustainability of higher education, as well as the more traditional mobility programmes, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We have a long way to go. I mentioned that the gross tertiary enrolment was 30% globally, but it's 9% in sub-Saharan Africa. And many groups, be they socioeconomic, ethnic or cultural, are chronically underrepresented in higher education. In Malawi, only 4% of students enrolled in tertiary education are from families representing the poorest 40%. In South Africa, 50% of students enrolled in tertiary education institutions drop out in their first 3 years because of pressure and economic circumstances. The explosion of demand has also placed a huge strain on many systems unable to cope with the increase in numbers. Academic staff in existing institutions are overstretched, leading to a decline in the quality of teaching and squeezing out time for research. In India, for example, what's wonderful is participation in higher education has doubled from 14 million in 2007 to 28 million in 2013, but quality control has lagged behind institutional expansion. There are many quite interesting reforms happening at the moment in India. So one of the other things that the ACU is very keen on doing and talking to UNITAF about is our role promoting policy to support higher education. Now, that isn't an easy argument to make, since if you think about it, it's only since 2015 that higher education has been recognised as an integral part of achieving the SDGs. And so when you talk to governments in a developing context, or at the Commonwealth Education Ministers or Heads of Governments meeting, the emphasis is nearly always, particularly with aid agencies, on primary and secondary. But our argument is that if you want really good primary and secondary, you have to educate the teachers and you have to create the content, and much of that comes from universities. Universities are too often only associated with cutting-edge research, which is rightly we should be proud of, but they are also very much fundamentally part of the culture of whole ecosystem of education. So universities have a key role to inspire and inform action through education about the SDGs as well, and we saw a stunning example from Geneva. I would say that many universities have their own ways of installing curriculum. NUS and NTU now have a compulsory undergraduate module that many students take. I think there are many examples where universities are beginning to see how you can inspire a student through their journey in universities, but whether it's about a greener campus and being involved in actually making their own environment more sustainable, but also giving them opportunities through volunteering and through international partnerships to get involved in life-changing initiatives. At King's College, there's an initiative called the Sanctuary Programme. Every member of the university is introduced to this programme, which is to do with refugees and migrants, and there are many hundreds of different ways that students can get involved. So universities need to translate global goals into locally relevant contexts and make apparent the relevance of sustainable development to all academic disciplines, which is a challenge. Members in low-income countries and small states often lead the way on this aspect, as national and local concerns are closely aligned to the SDGs. For example, in the Pacific, it's striking, or rather obvious actually, that action on climate and oceans is an existential part of everybody's day. So the universities of South Pacific and Fiji National have integrated sustainable development into their operations and teaching. But they've also formed and led part of a network with the University of the West Indies on climate and resilience, where we're not discussing cutting-edge science around climate. We're discussing universities' role in climate-impacted societies. How do they look after their students and staff? How do they make sure their intellectual content is secure? What kind of partnerships can they create to ensure that their students can continue their courses in other places if their campus is underwater, and then return those students to their university? Up until now, in many cases, students are looked after, but they don't return to the university or they don't get a joint degree. In Africa, the University of Pretoria has prioritised the integration of the SDGs in its curricula across all programmes, seeking opportunities for students to interact with their content and application throughout their educational research programme. In more developed country universities, universities have, I think, a slight mindset to say we'll do it in our own way, but there are actually more, I think there is a movement now towards a more cooperative approach, linking universities together. So, for example, Kent has created something called Future Proof, which is providing training to staff and students in every department to take action and align activities against the SDGs. And I think there is more of an openness now for universities with high brands, let's say, to cooperate more openly with each other on an SDG agenda. More can be done. There is something called the Sula test, an online tool, which I've only just found out about recently, but it sounds a wonderful way in which universities and others can help assess and improve sustainability literacy of all staff and students and help inform teaching. I think that's at undergraduate and master's level. International and cross-sectoral partnerships can be used to co-create and share content. And we're doing this in our Climate and Resilience Network and in a Peace and Reconciliation Network that the University of Melbourne is leading for the Association of Commonwealth Universities. This is about how universities operate in post-conflict and post-colonial societies. And it's a fascinating mix of countries. Over 60 have joined the network, for example, to talk about curriculum, best practice, reaching out to marginalised communities, languages, an exchange of professional understanding of how to support these sorts of universities, sometimes in very fragile contexts. And so we are sharing and co-creating content, and that, I think, is also very much part of how you can scale up the SDGs, by scaling up access and capacity building of institutions that, for the SDGs to be successful, you need strong higher education systems in developing contexts. You can't get those stronger higher education systems without international cooperation promoting healthy universities in developing contexts. So, universities do two things. They create global citizens, they create cutting-edge research, but they also have a role in equipping current and future leaders, decision-makers and citizens with knowledge to address the SDGs, working with the third pillar, working with business, working with industry, working with unusual, perhaps, partners that they haven't thought of before. And I think that's another aspect of the SDGs that's really successful, is that this, the need to think in a multilateral way means that you're actually beginning to sort of upturn your orthodoxies and think outside the box in a way that you possibly don't within any one particular academic discipline. So we need to encourage more interdisciplinarity, and we need to encourage more collaboration. Networks are a really good way of doing this. Co-creating learning materials and good practice in the curriculum, research, institutional structures, policies and reforms. And the ACU is committed to doing this through its grants. We also, the more traditional way of building capacity is through mobility. So the ACU manages the large UK government scholarship schemes, which see about 3,500 students to the UK every year. They're called the Commonwealth Scholarship Commission and the Chevening programme. But we also manage, and we're very proud of this, a programme for South-South mobility, which is actually part of SDG 4, which means that students from any university in our network can go and study a 2-year fully funded master's in another developing country. And that is also a way of, I think, building capacity alongside a blended approach and alongside research capacity building. Summer schools is another way of tackling it, particularly when students cannot, either because of their discipline or because of their social circumstances, spend a year or a semester in another university. Another really good way, I think, of doing so is by running summer schools, which I think many universities are now doing very successfully. We are holding one next year with the University of Mauritius in public health. We did sustainable cities and communities in Hong Kong. And we did global food security in Malaysia and disaster resilience in India. And we also did a very successful one on the SDGs themselves in Rwanda a few years ago. Rwanda, of course, is a really interesting example of a university that has gone through, in a country that has gone through enormous turbulence and conflict, and is actually a wonderful example of the rebirth of higher education and the importance of it to its society. And we're looking forward to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting being in Rwanda in a year's time. So I'm going to conclude because I'm also aware of the time. Higher education has a key role to play in all 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and universities and the higher education community has an obligation to work internally to see its own environment transformed by the Sustainable Development Goals, whether it's inspiring students to go on individual journeys or whether it's a collective attempt, but also to educate about universities' role in the SDGs. Because universities are also under attack. It's not just multilateralism. The role of an expert has been questioned very recently in the UK, but I think in many other countries as well. And making the case for why higher education matters is a very, very important part of reaching, I think, success in the SDGs. To begin to meet our 2030 targets, we need to scale up and accelerate our efforts. And this will entail overcoming institutional and policy barriers to greater innovation and collaboration within universities, between them, and international associations, government, and the private sector. There are a multitude of excellent examples, but it's actually working with UNITAR and others and putting them on a platform that allows others to access that good practice and replicate it themselves. There's no lack of will to do so on behalf of universities. International associations like ours can play a catalytic role, developing and sharing good practice, brokering non-traditional partnerships between universities in developed and developing countries, and providing a platform to engage with different types of organisations. So with that, I just want to look forward now to learning more about the latest innovations and developments and opportunities for collaboration over the course of this trialogue, and wish you all and ourselves success in our common efforts towards achieving the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. NEWMAN, for providing so much food for thought for the rest of the trialogue on the role of the universities, concrete opportunities and pathways for mainstreaming the SDGs, and how the partnerships can be leveraged to reach this objective. We have very limited time, so we can take 2 questions now. Please be very concise when you formulate your question, so that we have sufficient time for the case study just after this presentation. Any volunteers? So there is one.
Hi, my name is Max Kushner from Israel. My question would be, you mentioned scientists have this conundrum between getting funded, basically getting funding for their research and doing applied research that will benefit all. Are you working on initiatives to provide financial support for scientists and also get them recognized within the system for doing this kind of research?
I think it's more of a cultural change. There is also, I mean, it is happening in the UK, the Global Challenges Research Fund, which is, uses the UK AIDS development budget, but is actually being provided by the research councils of the UK. It's mainly for cutting-edge research, and it's highly competitive, and it's a lot of money. But they're now insisting that a strand of that funding is used for helping the developing country, because in many cases, international collaboration will involve researchers from a developing country, but they will do absolutely nothing to help that institution once the research has ended. And so the change towards saying that's not good enough, you've got to actually you've got to understand it's an unequal relationship and find ways of creating more sustainability for that university so it grows, is changing. So I think we are lobbying to make that change understood and change of culture needed.
Thank you.
Another question? I think there is a question here.
Antonio Hautle, Global Compact Network Switzerland. Thank you, Joanna. It's very interesting. One question. You said in the SDG discussion, in development assistance, universities are neglected. So it's the focus is on primary and secondary school. What I'm missing is also the professional training, the professional schools which are in the middle. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, I do. I mean, my network is focused primarily on higher education, but we are very aware that the wider tertiary environment is a very important partner for us. So and in the UK context, it's incredibly badly funded and is under a lot of review. I think we have a lot to learn from the Europe sector, where actually vocational training is done very well and supported by government in a different way. I would say there is a tension, though, between there is an argument that says that because of the fourth industrial revolution and because the OECD, for example, has estimated that the majority of blue-collar jobs will be replaced by machines, and because nobody's job is going to be there for life, it's very important to look at training, and university education is in some ways redundant. There's a lot of writing about that. I would argue the exact opposite and say that it is an absolute crime that the people across the world who deserve access to higher education, deserve the right to have their brains and their minds widened and excited by education, do not have access to it, because if you have the ability to study at a university, then that training, that critical training to think critically and independently, will stand you in better stead for a life of different jobs and no jobs at times, and an entrepreneurial attitude, than doing it 1 or 2 specific training, because there must be a recognition now that any job you do, any training you do, will need to be upskilled continually. That's why lifelong learning is also so important as part of the SDGs, because I don't think any of us will be able to do some training for a job and that will be it, thank you very much, for the rest of your life. You'll always have to upskill, because we're living in a time of industrial and technological change, which in some ways has huge possibilities for us, but in other ways is very frightening and alienating for large populations.
Thank you very much, Dr. Newman. Dr. Newman is staying with us until 1 o'clock. So if there is any outstanding question that you would like to ask during the lunchtime, you can also have an opportunity. Thank you very much. Now we are going to have a short case study that is going to be presented by Dr. Konlani Nayon-Joa, who is the director of the Center of Continuing Education and the Third Cycle at the Togolese Public Administration School. Dr. Konlani is going to share the experience of the Togolese ENA on mainstreaming the SDGs into their program curricula. Dr. Konlani, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start my speech, I want to let you know that I'm not easily in English. Je parle moins l'anglais, donc excusez les emports que je ferai. Alors, I want to thank the organizers of this thing. My name of Director of ENA of Togo. By ENA program, the case of ENA of Togo, ENA is an administrative institute created in 1958 to respond the colonial managers who was going. You can move. Okay. Donc, it's the main objective of ENA is to turn the senior management okay. Alors, the Reform Public Administration places the ENA at the edge of the system of strengthening capacity of the administration to adapt the school to the new challenges of development. A school reform was launched in 2012, led by ENA Quebec. The reform aims to make ENA a center of excellence capable of playing central role in the political, administrative, and economic governance of the country. On average, 250 students from Central and West African countries graduate from ENA every year with specialization in general administration, labor administration, customs, taxation, diplomacy, health, service management. Large contingent of students come from Benin, Côte d'Ivoire, Congo, Gabon, Niger, Central Africa, and Chad. What about SDG training program of ENA? The reform of ENA training pathway places special emphasis on the SDG, including the promotion of gender, the fight against social and environmental vulnerabilities, and planning. The training module on planning, project management, leadership, human research management, environmental protection, risk and disaster management replace 30% of the whole volume of each training. All these themes are based on the national development of Togo, as along 2018 to 2023. The NDP contains 42 priorities. Network ENA belongs to the network French-speaking ENA and human space. Sharing of experience of pooling of research focused on issue, public finance, decentralization, and administrative reform. Challenges. The challenges faced by ENA are how to provide training for trainers to better integrate SDG issue into their lessons. Second, how to raise awareness of all public officials in Togo around the SDGs to help mainstream the goal in public policies and in the day-to-day management of public affairs. How to mobilize the country, the civil society around. Moving forward, strengthening cooperation with UNITA. The pilot SDG training organized in Lomé in November was very beneficial and conclusive. Leave no one behind, plans and integrated policy were explained in connection with our national policy and planning tools. Set up a continuing education program for raising awareness of public officials and civil society actors around SDGs. Disseminate through training tools for planning and monitoring evaluation. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Merci.
Thank you very much, Dr. Konlani.